Hello and welcome to this week's HealthTech Hour with me, Steve Roest. Each week we bring you the best news, views and interviews with the CEOs, leaders, founders and clinicians who are changing the face of healthcare in the UK and beyond. As regular listeners know, I am a CEO and founder of a health tech business myself called PocDoc. PocDoc's Healthy Heart Check is the equivalent of the NHS Health Check. In 9 minutes with your phone, you get a full lipid profile and your heart age and your risk of a cardiovascular event. We are available now across all retailers on the high street: Boots, Superdrug, Well, Pharmacy to You, Asda. So if you do want to look after your heart health, go get our Healthy Heart Check. If you'd like more information, please go to pocdoc.co, POCDOC.co. And thank you as ever to PocDoc for the support for the show. As always, I also want to thank everybody listening live on the amazing UK Health Radio. We love this live platform. It's brilliant. We really appreciate you tuning in and listening, and our listenership keeps growing. Thanks also, as ever, to Johan and the amazing crew here that keep us on the air. Really appreciate it. Thank you if you're listening on demand on any of the podcast channels or podcast platforms. We are everywhere. We now have people downloading the podcast in over 50 countries every single month, which is just wild. And we really appreciate you showing up. We really appreciate all the comments and all the likes. Please do remember to rate the show as well. It makes a big difference to us. So please, if you can remember to do that, we'd love you for that. And thank you if you're watching this on YouTube, on our HealthTech Hour channel, or if you're watching this on my Instagram channel at Steve Roest. So that's kind of the show admin out the way. Now on to today's show. We've not really done a show like this, I don't think, before. But on today's show, we've got a new guest on called Sharlene Lopez, who is an expert in healthcare branding and how branding can actually influence or encourage behavior change, and why branding is so important for health tech businesses. Sharlene is also the chief growth officer for a business called Alertive, which is a UK-based health tech, which is using digital technology to make communication between doctors about patients more efficient. And, which is really cool, Sharlene is also an AI advisor to Google. Google, kind of a big deal. So awesome to have her on the show. Sharlene, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Good. So what's been your sort of career trajectory to this point to end up as a expert in branding, advisor to Google, growth officer? Like where did it all kind of start?
Yeah, do you know, I kind of fell into healthcare actually at the very beginning and was working to support life sciences in value-added educational programs with clinicians, and didn't really understand how much I valued healthcare until I had a blip of working in tobacco industry for a couple of years.
How did that happen?
I applied those same skills and just went into a totally different industry.
Okay. Were you in the UK or were you out in?
I was in Asia and in Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, which were growing markets actually for it. And I think I realized, I spent 2 years doing that, and I realized that actually the skills that you have of influencing behavior change and shaping people's perceptions of things is actually quite a powerful skill, and it needs to be targeted towards good. So then I went straight back into healthcare.
Your superpower, you needed to use your superpower for good.
You need to use it for good, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. But what are these kind of skills and how did you develop them?
Yeah, so I think having a deep understanding and interest in people and people's stories and how we communicate with each other, I think that was a natural inclination that I had. So I just kind of learnt really in the roles spanning commercial, so from sales through to marketing, through to branding, working life sciences, industry, and then agency side, just had a really great 360 view of healthcare and the different people that operate within it. And I think my overriding view was that the core issue that I feel, and I still don't think we've overcome it actually, is how we communicate with each other to collaborate for the greater good of whoever it is we're trying to service. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of gap that I see between industries or between the NHS and health tech companies, or life sciences and life science and health tech companies as well. But I was going to say with clinicians, really made me see that actually there's a lot that needs to be done here in terms of helping people to communicate with each other.
Okay, and just specifically in health or in any area of health, or like what? How?
I think health's a really interesting one. So I worked with with the Innovation District in White City.
Okay.
And what they're really trying to do there is to put together industry, health techs, entrepreneurs, and academics, and create this kind of ecosystem where all can benefit from each other. So the life sciences obviously bring their research capabilities and their huge capacities they've got in facilities. Academics bring their kind of their robust approach to things and ethical approach to things and how things need to be researched. And then entrepreneurs are just, that huge drive and growth and opportunity. And I think one of the biggest issues that I saw within healthcare is that the zone is so big for each of those. They're like their own kind of massive environments. But when you try to bring them together, I don't think people are doing that because they're so happy within their own lanes. And I think specifically within healthcare, I don't think we do enough of that kind of crossover, which is, I think...
Do they do it really well in other industries, do you think?
I don't think I see such a gap within other industries.
Okay.
I think where you've got more of a... Maybe it's because it's the public sector. It could be to do with that. We've got a common customer within the public sector that you don't have that, like the markets don't decide. You don't have that commerciality. The NHS has just got a totally different set of decision making. So I think potentially that's the reason why it doesn't happen. But then also you've got that within financial sectors as well. The financial sector are very they want to keep themselves separate from the fintechs. And I think there's this general kind of thing, I don't know whether it's governance or because it's such a complex area that it's not so busy, but I just feel that the three seem to go off in their different lanes. And actually, if we can bring those people together and help them to communicate and understand each other and get their point across, then I think we can just achieve so much more.
Yeah, I do think that there's a gulf between the healthcare system and the wider kind of venture capital funding sort of industry, for sure. You know, because I feel like there's such a gulf between those two groups, and I've never seen them in the same room, at all. So one side is sort of frustrated that they keep being presented with quote unquote innovative companies, but that doesn't really solve the actual problem that they need to solve. And they're frustrated that they're continuously told, well, this is innovative and you should adopt it. Right. And then on the other side of things, the venture capital are basically flying blind a little bit about what the healthcare system will adopt at scale. And so it's difficult for them to make long-term investment decisions.
Yeah, I think, and obviously there's a culture that comes into that as well. So the UK situation with the US is like worlds apart, isn't it, in terms of tolerance for risk and willingness to fail and what failure looks like, or whether it's a step towards, learning for success in the future. So I think there's a whole culture thing around it. And this is where this whole understanding human behavior and how people think and the parameters that they're going off is really important. And I think we kind of forget that all of those things are influencing our values and how we operate, how we arrive at the meeting, how we perceive the messages that be given to us. And I think if there was greater understanding of those human drivers, then we would be able to tap into those better and find commonalities. And I think definitely with tech, when I look at the adoption of tech, tech moves really quickly. And we complain that the recipients of it don't move fast enough. But actually, I think tech is always going to move really quickly. And the bit that's never really addressed well enough, I don't think, by tech companies is what's the behaviour change that needs to happen behind this for your tech to be adopted. It's not about whether the tech works. Yeah. And behaviour change is slow. You mean
behaviour change not of just of patients, but actually of clinicians implementing things?
Yeah, of humans.
Right.
I think you can learn the tech and that's always going to move really fast. But if you actually learn human behaviour, we haven't changed for generations and generations and generations in how we make decisions. So I think that's the bit that we need to tap into more, because tech's always going to move fast. It's the humans that's always going to slow it down.
Interesting. And so what are the conclusions that you've come to? Like, how can branding help behavior change?
Yeah. So I think there's not a common understanding, I don't think, within health tech that I've seen of branding. I think we're quite an immature industry when it comes to branding, which is interesting because in life sciences, obviously they're very well established about the importance of brand.
You mean these big like pharmaceutical companies?
Exactly, the big pharmaceutical companies with, you know, the huge brand launches and all of that. And they had that.
Do you mean for the products or for the company or both?
Both, actually. I think some of them went down the product route. So a couple like GSK and Pfizer.
Yeah.
They went down, the company route, and others went down the product route, like your P&Gs, for example. And I think what brand does, brand ultimately is about trust.
Mm-hmm.
So, and brand perception. And I think some people have an idea that brand is about the logo. So yes, I've got a brand, I've got a name, I've got a logo, I've got a website, but that's not the fullness of brand. Brand is about people's perception of you.
Yeah.
And
your values, or what people think your values are.
Exactly that. And I think we focus so much on the tech, on the product, which obviously we need to make sure that it's safe and it's efficient. But that's kind of cost of entry, really, if you're going to be working in healthcare.
Yeah, a lot of that's like just gets you through regulatory.
Exactly.
But some of the stuff actually doesn't go through regulatory. A lot of like the systems, IT, and things like that. Yeah, non-clinical stuff.
But you'll hear within health tech people saying, I can't believe they've gone for that provider. Actually, their aftercare is useless, or they might have a low cost now, but actually they haven't read the contract properly. And they'll say all of these things, but actually what they're not doing is anything to manage or influence the perception that others have that, okay, well then we're reliable, we've got transparent pricing, or
they don't take that like plus one step. They don't think, and then this is what we can do about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And people don't, I think there's a view of, you either go, what I've noticed within health tech, you're either a tech enthusiast who wants to do good in the world, so enters into healthcare because they see it as an area that
a noble
needs
pursuit.
A noble pursuit and in dire need of help.
Yeah.
Or it's clinicians who are so frustrated from the inside that they come out to try to help go the inside. And there's so much focus on the product, but you don't get to the product until you've already gone quite a long way down the process mentally of what do I think of them?
Yeah, I also think that there's, I think it's bundled up in this, but it'd be interesting to know, where do you stand on this issue of solving a real customer problem versus building a piece of technology?
Yeah.
It's part of the continuum, yeah?
Yeah. And exactly. Well, this is exactly it, isn't it? You can't get a solution and then try to find the problem.
No.
You really have to understand people.
And why do you think I think healthcare particularly suffers from this, where lots of smart people make things without really knowing whether or not someone's going to buy them or not. And then that creates a lot of friction in the system. But my perception is that happens a lot in health, but I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. I think it does happen a lot. I think it's because the problems that really need solving are quite boring, actually. And nobody really wants to have...
difficult, or really, really difficult.
Or really difficult.
Really hard.
Yeah.
And you can't get your head around the whole, the immensity of it.
Yeah.
So you just solve a part of it and hope that's okay.
And I think this is a big criticism, isn't it, of health tech?
Yeah.
That they just solve one aspect of it. They don't look at it, for example, the whole pathway.
Yeah, I remember when we were building the Healthy Heart Check at PocDoc, we spent, I think, 100, 200 hours speaking to clinicians and patients before we even started developing, before Spade hit the ground. And that was because my background was not in health tech. And I was very insistent with my two co-founders who were scientists that we needed to be absolutely clear on what the what was the fullness of the need that someone wanted here, and how could we build against that. So I had a hunch, which proved out to be correct, not wishing to blow my own trumpet, but it's true, that the system didn't need another cholesterol test.
Yeah.
The system was completely fine, to be perfectly honest with you, with lab-based cholesterol tests. What the system needed was a way to deliver the cardiovascular prevention pathway at scale outside of a GP surgery. That is not the same thing as building a cholesterol test. You see what I mean? And I think that is what if I with all the entrepreneurs that I've spoken to through this show and interacting through the other channels that I have, the really, really successful ones seem to also follow that type of pathway. And the ones that seem to be struggling are the ones that sort of built something and then didn't really know how that was going to be used, or it solves a part of the pathway but not the whole pathway.
Yeah.
Or a part of the problem but not the whole problem.
And I think as well, there's situations like, well, for example, actually, like the seatbelt, actually.
Okay, yeah, let's take it back.
The seatbelt can actually have an unintended consequences of raising mortality, because.
Can it?
Yeah.
What?
Because
the seatbelt?
The unintended consequence of it is you might drive more riskier or faster because you've got a full security of.
Is that actually legit, or is that?
It's actually legit.
Okay,
it's actually legit.
Okay,
yeah.
I'll take
And there
your
was
word for
actually a case recently in the BBC where there'd been a HealthTech solution that automated alerts.
Okay.
And the automation of the alerts needed to happen as a backup, as a support thing to the clinical care.
Okay.
So it was in a mental health setting, and they needed to go into the rooms and check on the patients. But because the system alerted, what they'd stopped doing was then going into the rooms to check. So an unintended consequence of that.
Yeah, you
was
rely
then
on
people
that,
over-rely
but then
on.
yeah.
So it can change behaviour in ways that actually that you're not expecting.
And is undesirable.
Yes.
Potentially.
Yes, yeah. And I think we need to look at, as HealthTech, we need to look at that. What's the unintended consequences? If I'm calling attention because renal failure, for example, was another one that I heard of. And actually, they were doing really well when you look at their stats. But actually, if you look more broadly at the hospital, it wasn't, because all of the other patients didn't have those issues, were then being deprioritized because you had this alert that was incoming on this specific type of issue.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's sort of like this balance between, is it better to find more cases, or does finding more cases put more strain on more things?
Well, that's the other case, I think. And I think that's where PocDoc's done really well, actually, because what you've managed to do there is to help the people who are concerned about their healthcare not access primary care unless they actually need it.
Yeah.
And I think that trend is going to be rising with the prevalence
Yeah,
of people tracking there.
Yeah.
So I think you could have done the opposite and actually had everybody attending GP and really open the floodgates for actually a service that, would be overwhelmed already.
Yeah.
So I think you've done really well in the way you've designed it.
What do you think are some of the companies in health with the best branding? Like, what's the high watermark here?
Do you know who I really like? And it's such a shame, they've just been bought by somebody, but LV.
Okay.
So LV started off with breast pumps, and then I think they moved into incontinence.
Okay.
So at the time when they started up, breast pumps were really sorry to say that about Tupperware, but like a Tupperware brand.
Right.
They were really kind of very boring,
Functional.
very bland, functional, not sexy. Not that they've made breast
pump sexy.
Sexy, but they've made the brand like an epitome of female empowerment. And to do that with a breast pump and an incontinence product
it's a stretch.
Was a stretch, considering that the market that they started off in and how they've changed that.
How did they do it? Do you know? What's your take on it?
Weirdly, actually, they've always been my number one on brand. And then I happened to have a conversation on LinkedIn with the brand manager.
Oh, cool.
And I said, this is what I think you've done for the brand. And it was chilling because she came back and said, that's exactly what I have wanted to do with the brand. So when you bought into a breast pump, you bought into LV because you bought into, I'm an empowered woman, I'm modern, I'm going to carry on with my life, this is going to fit in with me, rather than sitting there like a cow, feeling like you're being milked, which was the kind of insight they had on the alternative.
Yeah.
So they did some really kind of guerrilla tactic things. When they were really early on, they did a PR campaign of giant breasts, like 7-8 foot breasts on the top of key London. Oh. Because what they wanted to say
I missed that one.
What they wanted to say was that they wanted to bring it out of being a shameful private activity.
Yeah.
And actually, this is natural, this is normal, we should be proud of this.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations I heard somewhere was, we only know that we've overcome the stigma when you can hear people talking just randomly in the street about things like incontinence and breastfeeding.
Yeah.
So I think those kind of guerrilla moves were...
That makes sense.
Yeah, were excellent.
Anyone else apart from LV?
I really like Headspace.
Oh yeah, they've done very well.
So what I like about Headspace is they were when they set out, they're for people who don't meditate. And can you imagine going to investors and saying, I've got this great product, it's for people who don't like to do it.
Yeah.
And there was a huge gap in that, actually, because at the time it was kind of the real hippie, woo-woo kind of, you full-on kind of meditation. There wasn't really a meditation for those people who went into that lifestyle.
There wasn't a softer mindfulness really approach.
There wasn't.
It was like you're either all in or not.
And it wasn't cool to be. Like, it just wasn't a mainstream thing to do.
Well,
at
mental
that time.
health wasn't a mainstream thing.
No,
for
no.
Particularly not for, I don't want to sort of stigmatize, but especially not for like men or anything.
No, you're exactly. And interestingly on that, actually, so going back to the question, so what they did was create a brand that didn't feel like it was, it's not like the calming colours, it's not got all of that kind of meditation feel, like it's a bright orange round smiley face. And the founder there was, I think his name was Adam, wasn't he?
Not sure.
He used to be a monk.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that.
He used to be a monk, a Buddhist monk, and then he came back to bring meditation to the masses.
Monk tech.
And made
I
like that.
Monk tech.
Made a fortune along the way.
Yeah.
And he always kept really true to that. We're for the people who don't meditate. So they've done some really awesome partnerships. And this about this male mental health. They've done some partnerships with, I think it's the NBA.
Okay.
Amongst others. And I think it's brilliant because what they've done then is destigmatized it within sporting athletes. Your psychological well-being is really important to performance. But they've also then destigmatized it for, if you imagine if you've got basketball players with logoed up headspace.
I think the biggest thing, it's not about health tech, but one of the biggest things I thought was like that shifted the mental health discussion in the UK was when you had footballers and rugby players sort of openly talking about seeing therapists and needing help and things like that. Like that for me, when I saw that stuff happening, I was like, wow, that's going to have a real impact. Like,
yeah,
a real impact.
Yeah. And those kind of like brand ambassadors, I think they can just change perceptions, can't they?
Like Davina with
trends.
menopause.
Yeah, Davina did exactly the same.
So we're actually going to have to go for our first commercial break now because my producer is waving at me off screen. So we will be back with the second part of today's HealthTech Hour with my guest today, Sharlene Lopez, who is a healthcare branding expert, Chief Growth Officer at Alertive, and Google AI advisor. Wow, we've got a lot to talk about in the rest of the show. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Hello and welcome back to the second part of today's HealthTech Hour with me, Steve Roest, and my guest today, Sharlene Lopez. So Sharlene, I want to switch up the conversation a little bit. So tell us about how you got involved in Alertive, because I think it's an interesting health tech play. And I think I'd love to hear about how you're applying your behavior change, branding, dark arts into Alertive.
Yeah. So I've worked within health innovation industry for about 15 years, but I've always worked externally and supporting on brand and behavior change and marketing communications. And I wanted to go internal to be able to really kind of own the brand and see the workings from the inside. And I think Alertive is a really interesting company. They've been around for a good few years.
Okay.
Alertive was created, I think, about 5-6 years ago, but the actual company's been a lot longer than that. And they had a great product. They have a great product. They have really good customer feedback. Those that have been on the journey are super effusive, massive advocates of the product. But what they didn't really have, I felt, was kind of a really good broad positioning that helped the audience to really understand the breadth of what they could do. They'd kind of gone for shorthand brand references. So things like we're the WhatsApp of healthcare, which they're totally not. Or
I also think I'm not a big fan of I'm the this of that type approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, anyway, carry on.
Yeah, because then you get tarred with that brush as well.
Yeah, like WhatsApp isn't like great in lots of ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway.
But I think people use it as a shortcut, don't they, to try to understand. But what they don't realize, they've then imbued those brand qualities onto your product as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's a dangerous play. But it's a shorthand when you're struggling to explain it. Yeah. And also pager replacement is another way that is quite easy to understand. But when you're doing something that's totally new, that changes.
How long have they been having pages? Since when? Have they still got pages, or when did pages go? Are we still paging people?
We're still paging people. Wes Streeting said a few weeks ago that he does want to get rid of pages. Okay. But they said that a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Who's addicted to the pages?
There's a lot of pager usage out there.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of pager usage out there.
But I guess the alternative is what? A phone with an app on? Is that the alternative? Or what is the alternative? Is this where Alertive comes in?
So it does come in. It's not just a pager replacement. I think there's much more benefits than that, but this is something that they do. So basically what Alertive does is by digitizing the communication flow between clinicians and having the right patient information on hand to the right person at the right time, it really makes your care coordination much more streamlined. So there's an example recently that we've just started being using with a trust, and we've integrated with their EPR, and it helps them to, as soon as the information about the vital signs is entered into the EPR.
EPR being for a Broadchurch electronic patient record.
Yeah, thank you.
It's all right. We like to keep everyone on the same level. We like to keep everyone on the same level on the show.
Yeah. So pick me up on acronyms because I'm a... Okay. So what it helps them to do is to recognise the patients that need help, helps them escalate the process, and helps the clinicians to respond to it, which has huge impacts in terms of patient improvement. They're getting the right care faster.
But otherwise, these patients, because the information's moving quicker, so because the doctor's not relying on responding to a page. Is that what you mean?
Exactly.
Okay.
And you don't know whether it's been received.
Right.
And the other problem I think we've got is this human element in this again, is that we know that staff are struggling because there's, obviously not a full workforce at the moment, and potentially won't be in the future. I think it's going to be a growing problem that staff knows each other are stressed. Yeah. So if you're a nurse and you're trying to contact a consultant and you know that they're super stressed and they haven't responded, or you don't know if they've responded, you might not chase again. It puts a lot of pressure on the nurses to then chase up, and then the feedback they're going to get from the consultant. All of those kind of things play into this idea of having to escalate things again. So what Alertive does is just systemizes the whole thing. It just happens all automatically. As soon as the data is entered into the EPR, system takes over, it's escalated into the clinical pathways, the right people are alerted. If they can't, it escalates to go to the next people automatically, just takes out the whole thing.
Okay.
But the bigger play, I think, on this, which is the future, I think, for Alertive and I think for others, is once you've digitized that whole process, often those things aren't auditable because the communication methods they've used before weren't auditable.
Yeah, they just disappear off into the ether.
Exactly.
So just to bring everyone up to speed, I think auditability, traceability in healthcare is super important. So not just in developing a medical device, but in all kinds of different ways. But if you develop a medical device, any kind of diagnostic test or anything, you have to be able to trace all the elements of that back to the original batch that was produced originally in the factory, to literally the jar that was delivered with that reagent in it. So, and the same thing is what you're saying here is that if there's a clinical decision made, ideally you want to be able to audit the flow of how that information was sent out and therefore acted on or not. Yeah,
exactly that. And they were, running blind before. So now they can see that. If there's ever needs to be an investigation, you've got the information, but also you can identify best practice. So you can identify what needs to be tweaked, what's working well, and then that comes into that's a much bigger play, I think, in terms of supporting the workforce in delivering care, in coordinating the workforce to deliver that more efficiently. And I think these kind of things are just going to be a growing need,
And how have clinicians reacted to Alertive? Because on what I find on this show and just in general in life, and being a health tech business in the UK, you come across, I know so many businesses where what they do just makes so much sense. And actually, I bet if you spoke to 10 people on the street, they assume that the NHS is using something like this already.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's their assumption. So what have been the what's been the feedback from clinicians about this? Because on the face of it makes total sense.
Yeah, I think I really like that question as well, because that's ultimately what's really important, isn't it? So on the whole, clinicians really like it because what they were doing before was getting bleeped, whether it was emergency or not emergency, having to find a phone, writing a note on a piece of paper about what they need to do, phoning the person back, maybe they're not there, maybe they are there. That's all gone.
Super asynchronous,
ridiculous.
Really clunky.
Yeah. And, interrupting patient care to go and phone and find out that it's not urgent.
Also, you're creating a lot of risk when you really think about it, about missed connections. Sort of. I don't know what the actual clinical risk is because I haven't looked into it. But someone calls somebody's not there. Somebody leaves a message. Somebody didn't get the message. Yeah. And a day could go by or 2 days could go by. There's quite a lot of potential risk there.
There is a lot of risk, and sometimes we'll find that particular trusts will have had mortality associated with that, and that will trigger them wanting to.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So there is huge clinical risk in that. So clinicians like that.
Yeah.
Those clinicians that left a pager in a drawer because they didn't want to be bleeped all the time now are not so receptive, because now they get bleeped all the time because they're logged into a system that they need to log into.
Is it on their phone or is it an app?
Yeah, it's an app.
Them. Yeah.
It's either on their phone or on the trust provided phone.
Okay.
So what hasn't been...
If they're a leave it in the drawer kind of person, don't they just leave the phone in the drawer?
Well, they can't because it's their phone.
Oh, okay. It's their phone. It's their work personal phone kind of concept.
Potentially, either or. So what they might do is not log in, but that now has visibility.
Well, yeah, you can see that they've not logged in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's good about like the kind of positive, negative, carrot, stick nudges, you know? It's like, look, we'll encourage you to use it and we'll show you the benefits of using it and here's all the upside. And if you don't use it, we'll know. And then we'll give you some, what should we say, constructive feedback. Yeah,
but I think where Alertive are really good and where I think it's really important is when you're implementing things like this, you need to be working with people, and that behaviour change is super important in terms of you need people to want to engage with the system and understand the value of it, rather than you used to put away a pager in a drawer and now we're asking you to sign into an app.
I mean, if I know anything about the NHS or any large organisation, it's like you can't force people to do anything.
Yeah.
You have to go out and win hearts and minds.
Exactly.
And actually history's littered with examples of things that were pushed top down that then just completely fail. Not because of the merit of the idea or the initiative, but purely because they were pushed top down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you've got to go out and win the hearts and minds of people.
And that's exactly what the guys do. They literally do ward walking. They're literally down on the ground, walking with people, saying, how can we help you use this? How do you use this? And we find once the value's there, we get massive spread. People want to use it once they understand it. And I think that's really, really important. So we're seen as partners rather than this mandated kind of top down, you have to use it. Because you're right, it just doesn't work. We want to work with people. We're trying to help clinicians and nurses and the clinical workforce to coordinate care. Like their job's difficult enough as it is.
Yeah.
Without trying to find a phone at a desk and a piece of paper. It's just.
It is crazy that there would be anyone that would be against the concept of using something like Alertive. No, I prefer the pages and bits of paper and calling back and voicemails.
Yeah.
That's my preference.
Yeah.
But I guess it's probably more just like a resistance to change.
Yeah, I think it's really small pockets of people, and I think they're already in a clinical risk there, and it kind of just shows visibility. But I think there's a whole trust piece, isn't there, as well? I've worked with a few HealthTech companies, and they digitize a process, you have visibility, and then you can start looking at productivity levels. And there has to be if there's not trust between leaders and clinical teams, you're always going to have an issue. Whether the tech comes in and shows visibility, there's going to be resistance now because actually there's visibility on my productivity. How's that information going to be used?
Yeah.
So that huge piece around communication, and how do you sell that in, and the messaging and listening to people on the ground who are going to use it. It's a huge part. But it is. I think it's the bit that makes or break whether tech is used.
Yeah, because I think that you can procure things, but procuring things and buying things and things being used is super different.
Yeah.
We're going to have to stop again for our final break of the show. So, and then we'll come back for the final part. So this is our last break of this week's HealthTech Hour with my guest today, Sharlene Lopez. We will be right back after this break. Welcome back to this week's HealthTech Hour, the final part of this week's show with my guest today, Sharlene Lopez, who is an expert on branding in health that drives behavior change, the Chief Growth Officer of Alertive, and advisor to Google on AI. So let's pick up that final piece. So, I mean, Google's kind of a big deal, AI is kind of a big deal. So how does one end up advising Google on AI? How does that happen?
Yeah, so I've started with them about 7-8 years ago, actually, working on, so they do accelerator programs.
Okay.
And
for what type of company?
So they do them for really early stage tech companies.
Okay.
When I first started them, it was more general across industry. And now since COVID, they have specific AI for health accelerator programs. And so the ones I work with are South America, EMEA, and Africa. Mm-hmm. And And it's really because of COVID I can work on those, because they used to all be in person and now they're not. So they're all online. So you get like insights into totally different geographies and how the healthcare systems work.
Yeah.
And it's super selective to get onto there, to the accelerator programs. And there's basically a team of us, a team of mentors worldwide across. So I work on growth, there's product, there's finance, and there's a couple of others, I think design and something else.
Yeah.
And basically once you're part of the Google network, then you have access to the kind of global range of mentorship around it. And there's a lot of people within Google who are directly involved. So the Google Health leads are directly involved. Some of the AI leads are directly involved. And you really kind of feel like you're super close to the source of innovation.
Yeah.
And to have that kind of insight is, I mean, for the companies that get on the accelerators, it's incredible.
What's Google's health focus at the moment?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, well, I work mainly around where it's for not consumer health. So it's for, working with systems. And the focus is really on the clinical workforce. It's about, how do we look at efficiencies within the workforce, and how do we help people get access to healthcare?
So like large system type, feature-led, digital product-led interventions at scale. Yeah,
exactly that. And I think we're talking probably on a global basis, the way they kind of approach things is this idea of, I mean, it's not really dissimilar to how we're working in the UK, this idea of a growing population, reduced number of clinicians.
Yeah.
And how do we kind of manage that? How do we equalize healthcare? How do we equalize access to healthcare? And how do we make the most of the clinical workforce that we've got are really the core themes of it.
And are they close with government? Like, are they kind of working collaboratively, or are they sort of off because they're doing this in all the other countries? Like, how much of this is UK specific is, guess what I'm trying to get at?
So I don't see them really having, especially the area that I'm in, there's not a lot of particularly government involvement. I think they're really just about, and there's a lot of Google products. So ultimately, I think the core thing of this, that, they've got this entrepreneurial spirit, they've got all of that kind of intelligence within them, and then they've got all the software. So they're super well placed. And I think it's a feel good kind of give back thing to the entrepreneurial community that they do these accelerator programs. You definitely come across really interesting, different kind of health tech companies that are just solving all kinds of different problems.
Well, that's the reason why I started this show, because there were so many great companies out there solving all kinds of different things. Pretty much anyone in health is trying to do it for the right reasons, I suspect. I mean, broadly speaking, and everyone's focusing on something that makes the world net better. But a lot of the stories were more complex than a simple, 10-second statement for the mainstream media. So I wanted to create like this long form platform where we can dig into all of the stories and all of the benefits of what everyone's doing.
I think I find it a unique thing within health innovation, within the health tech community. I've worked within other areas of healthcare, and the reason I stay within health tech is that I feel that it's quite unique. You just get a really incredible, because this is an easy path. Like, you don't go into health tech because you think you're going to make a load of money, or it's an easy path. It's a really difficult path, and it's really difficult to succeed in it. And so therefore I think people's motivation in it is really passion and wanting to give back. I think a lot of the times it's about giving back, or it's about wanting to just legacy of net good.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's really inspiring. I think there's so many people in health tech that have either suffered with a particular problem or condition, or know a very close relative, and that's their inspiration and that's their drive. It's very inspiring.
Yeah, there's somebody, Davika Wood. I don't know whether you know her.
Oh, I've heard. Yeah.
So her stories are just incredible. The businesses that she's founded are all around her personal stories. So Vida was started her experience of being a young carer, caring for her grandma. Her grandma had dementia, and now she's with Brain Plus, and she started up some other domestic abuse platforms from her experience with domestic abuse. Like, everything that she's done has been from a real inner drive of creating something. I think people, you come across people like that within HealthTech. I don't think you don't come across people like that generally. I don't
I think that there's like that class of entrepreneurs that start businesses that they're great entrepreneurs, but I'm not sure necessarily like they experienced quite the level of direct pain associated with things sometimes.
Yeah.
They're really good at identifying opportunities for things like, and they're like, oh my God, this would be a brilliant business because I've identified this particular issue, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas I think people in health, a lot of people who've been through something and then want to try and stop other people from having to go through that.
Yeah. We did recently a brand survey within Alertive actually, and tried to understand why, because Alertive wasn't Alertive at the beginning it was more of a tech software company, software development company. Why did you choose Alertive? Why do you stay with Alertive? And we found overwhelmingly, which I was surprised actually, because this is right through the company. This wasn't just at founder level, that it was about reciprocity that they had, or their family had, or somebody had, the NHS had significantly impacted them positively. Or there was this idea of citizenship, of this is my duty as a citizen to the UK.
Nice.
And I want to deliver good back, and I believe in the concept of the NHS, and I want to see it work.
Yeah.
And I think to have that spirit on every level, I think is pretty special.
And what's your view about the noises coming out of government about whether they will or won't sort of support health tech, technology, life sciences, NHS technology? Like, what's your take on all of that?
I think it's really early to be able to say what's going to happen. I don't really see that there's a lot of choice.
That's a great point. It will be what it will be.
I think so. And I think when you've got, I was talking to somebody early today, actually, that the trust had done quite a lot of digital innovation because they were looking at it as a retention strategy for junior doctors, which I found really, really interesting.
Okay.
That actually, one way or another, either because of inefficiencies, clinical risk, lack of staff, overwhelming lists, that I don't see a valid alternative.
To what? Sorry.
To supporting tech and supporting innovation.
I think it depends what that support looks like, right? So I think if it's sort of, I really hope this is where this lands, that it's structural. And what I mean by that is that there's some consideration to creating some sustainability around injecting money into the system that flows through to companies. So let's make it a fair field and competitive, and you could tenders, procurement, whatever. Fine. I don't think anyone in the industry is looking for any freebie handouts. My concern is that where it ends up being, basically, there's no structural change, but there are these kind of like one-off dollops of cash that doesn't, just because you get that doesn't mean that that's a sustainable business, right? It might sustain you for a while, but it doesn't mean that you're building and scaling a business according to like general, normal, sound economic principles. And that stuff skews the market so much. And it kind of, previous governments have used it to sort of make it look like they're investing. So, 9 billion in a fund to do, this. So look, they should put money into all kinds of things: AI, life sciences, UK PLC manufacturing. There's a ton of stuff that would benefit from government funding. I just would love there to be some open discussion around how to structurally increase the amount of money that ends up going to innovative businesses within the system.
I feel that we're going in the other direction though with the conversations. They're removing the ring fencing of certain funding, and I just
that right?
Yeah, I just feel they're letting ICBs choose for themselves. Well, that's that's maternity, that's children's services, that's mental health. It's not being ring fenced anymore.
Wow, I didn't know they'd taken those ring fences away of that stuff.
Yeah. So
wow.
So I think that it's a different. I don't know. I think it's really
weird,
really
isn't
concerning.
it? Because they also have like a legal mandate to deliver some level of service in those areas.
Yeah, I think they're saying to be able to push it through that they're going to have to wait for legislation. And then you've got government and in the public asking, does that mean that we're deprioritizing mental health and in children
and stuff like that? That seems crazy.
So it depends on what the ICB does. So you could say, okay, if the ICB isn't or the trust isn't mandated anymore to do training for their midwife staff, maybe they're going to invest in tech for the maternity unit. Then that might be acceptable. It gives them that freedom to do that. But if they're going to say, actually, we don't want midwife, we're not going to spend this money on wind by train, we're going to spend it on a totally different department, they're free to do that as well.
I think they've got to be a bit careful about the law of, and I don't, obviously I'm not in charge of these budgets, obviously, clearly, and they're super complicated, and the people that do it, the theory is super intelligent, super smart, and that's all well and good. They've got to be a little bit careful, I think, of like the law of unintended consequences. So like if you create a structure where individuals can ultimately choose how they invest, then really the responsibility on those individuals is massive. Because they're no longer mandated or restricted by mandates. Yeah. And so that opens the door for all kinds of different things that could happen.
Yeah.
Not in malicious ways, but just in human nature. Like they really believe that the priority is this. And so that gets more funding at the expense of that, And humans are quite hard. I think they find it quite difficult and the NHS is so complex. I mean, running a hospital trust must be unbelievably complicated, like all these different things. And so taking away guardrails means you're actually increasing the amount of choices people need to make, which might be really difficult.
I think it's just a way of them hiding the fact that, look, there's less money now. So we're going to let you do what you want with the little bit that there is.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. So we've come to the end of the show, Sharlene. Sorry, my producer just gave me the nod. So thanks a lot for coming on. And before we go, I asked this of everybody. So what is the mantra or motto or internal monologue that you rely on to get you through difficult times that you want to share with people that might find it useful or helpful?
You did give me a heads up at the beginning.
I did give you a heads up on this.
But then we carried on talking for the whole time. So I'm going to have a quick thing now. I'd probably say, and it's not going to be some great profound thing, but I would probably say that no matter how bad it gets, at least you are trying to do something for the positive, for net good. So I can't think of anything more inspiring than that. But I think that's going to be
I agree with you. A win for one of us is a win for all of us.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Sharlene, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Steve. It was a pleasure.
Good. And thanks to everyone for listening. We will be back again next week.